Hello, happy Wednesday, and welcome back to another episode of Make Up Your Mind. I'm your host, Jahleane Dolne, and today I'm so excited because we have our very first ever guest episode. I have my dear friend, Bryanna Samuels here, and she is just a powerhouse all around. Met her earlier this year when we were at a mutual co working space, and she was doing a pop up for her brand, Good Rapport. And so today we're going to learn all about fashion, finance, and what it's like to be a founder straight from the source and from someone I truly admire. And I know everyone will have something to learn from. So, Bryanna, hello. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited. I feel like anytime we are having our conversations, we have so much to talk about and so much that we resonate with. So I'm excited for this conversation today.
Yes, definitely. I feel like you always know when you meet someone who's on the same wavelength as you and you're spouting out ideas like left and right and back and forth and just having really stimulating conversations. And that's something that's always needed in our lives. So I'm excited for this conversation today, too.
Yeah, I agree, especially in your 20s. They're a
Oh, yeah.
roller coaster.
Oh yeah, and we could we could talk about that all day. And just to start from the beginning, you and I were around the same age. We graduated around the same time, but everyone's post grad life and post grad journey is a little bit different. So I would love to hear what your journey has been from post grad, and if you could just walk us through that.
Yeah, I'm happy to. The majority of my career has been in finance, and over the last couple of years, I started to do a lot more within fashion. My finance career started really early on in university. I decided that I wanted to take the investment banking path, and as you might have known, especially being here in New York City, like one of the major financial hubs, the recruiting for investment banking is pretty intense and pretty early. So I had my first internship when I was a sophomore, following my sophomore year, and then just kept paralleling off of that. So once I graduated university, I started here in New York City. I then also did part of my associate tenure in investment banking before pivoting over to venture capital and growth equity investing in a large asset manager. It was awesome. I absolutely loved the pivot. For me, working in the venture and startup ecosystem was just so empowering and uplifting, especially to see all of the different founders and the missions that they had and how we could change or revitalize or revamp an outdated process or something new is coming to market. Over that same time period, I started to transition some of my hobbies into a profession as well. So I started doing a lot more within like the fashion community here in New York City, going to New York Fashion Weeks, trying to meet emerging designers. And then that really stuck with me and I got an itch. And that's really what continued to blossom my drive to start a fashion brand, which is Good Rapport. So I would say that post grad, it was a lot of finance, it was a lot of working. And then slowly over time, in these last couple of years, I've definitely been able to find a lot more of a balance and a balance to where I can fully jump into my hobbies, but then also turn that into a profession in a way as well.
Yeah, I love what you said about getting an itch because I find that so many times people post grad, you get into your corporate job and that's what you're set on doing. And then eventually, somewhere along the way, you stumble across some event or some connection and it reignites some passion that you had. So, I also love, your whole journey into finance from college because it seems like you took a pretty structured route and a pretty safe route. And mentioned having this itch. Can you go into a little bit more detail how that came about for you and if you were always interested in fashion and how that sort of played out post grad?
Yeah, if we want to start from the very beginning, it definitely started before post grad, if I'm being
Hmm.
transparent. It started as a kid. I remember one of the things that I used to do is I was very much like big into athletics. I grew up as a competitive swimmer and a competitive and field athlete. And growing up, especially in the like thousands and teens, like Nike was massive. And as an athlete, you're always wearing Nike gear. Like for me at least, especially because track and field was such a big component of my life too, no other brand really kind of matched that. So especially growing up in the thousands and teens, Nike was huge, especially because of the foothold that it had on track and field. So it was one of those marker brands for me. And I remember, and I reflected a lot on my childhood and all of the years that I've had up until this point recently. And I noticed, and it kind of clicked for me that I had this itch from a young age. I would be sitting in my room sketching if I could have my own athleisure brand, like what would that look like in my journal? And I always had a structured path, and I always identified as someone who was like multifaceted.
Mm-hmm.
So in addition to competitive swimming and track and field, I was still doing a lot within school and doing a lot of academics and extracurriculars, and if that was case competitions or whatnot. So I felt like I was being pulled in so many different directions. So for me at that time, especially still being so young, I was just like, I know that I want to kind of stop my sports career, focus on academics, but then also have a part of my life that's just like open to seeing what happens next.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fashion kind of took a back seat as I entered like my late teens and early 20s. It started to come back as I realized like, who am I? And started to do that re self discovery once you do graduate school, because I think it's such an important time and it's such a marker of your adulthood, because now you're fully branching off a lot of the predefined systems and pipelines that you've had, and you have a lot more autonomy. So, and you have to check in with yourself to know, like, am I on the path that makes me the most fulfilled and me the most happiest? Or can I get there somehow and in some point in time, if that makes sense? So, for fashion, it started when I was young, but it definitely ebbed and flowed. And I focused on it sometimes, didn't focus on it in others, but now I'm figuring out how to truly balance it.
Yeah, no, I love what you said about self discovery because I think that's the thing that makes people almost hit their quarter life crisis and be like, what am I actually doing? Who am I? Which is a bump that I feel like everyone hits between the ages of 23 to 25, but definitely by that age.
Oh, yeah.
When you are going through this journey and self discovery and you're working in finance and then you're starting to really incorporate fashion into your life again, you mentioned a little bit about being in New York and going to New York Fashion Week and so on. What are some other ways that you started to dip your toes into, the fashion world here while also balancing your career and finance? And was that challenging?
Yeah, it was really challenging. And I think I'm going to flip my response in the way that you mentioned this
Mm-hmm.
question. It was really challenging. And I always say that you're never going to achieve that 50-50 balance, but you achieve balance by understanding what your like hierarchy of prioritization is and making sure that you allocate time for each of those things, because you will always be in a period or a chapter of life where
Mm.
maybe your job has to take priority and that's eating up most of your time. Maybe it's something going on with your family or your close friends, or you have to go out to a lot of their celebrations and that's going to eat up a lot of your time. So I always like to say that we all strive for balance, but balance looks so different. And it's up to your time allocation and how you prioritize the different things that are meaningful for you. And I definitely was able to jump back into a lot more hobbies when I made the switch from investment banking to venture capital. The hours were not as significant. And I also had a lot more autonomy as well in that role. The venture role is amazing. And for me, it was a role that I got a lot of
Mm-hmm.
energy out of. So even if there was weeks that we were working late or traveling a ton, I still felt so energized and felt like I had the energy to then go pursue other hobbies. Kind of touching on the last part of your question too, it did start with going out to fashion shows and just like putting myself out there. Going to events by yourself can be really scary, but I highly encourage people to do it, because sometimes and oftentimes when I reflect on it, some of the best interactions that I've had and connections that I've made are when I show up by myself, or when I was talking myself out of going, but then I was just like, you know what? I committed to this, so I'm going to follow through.
Yeah.
And it just showing up for yourself is so important. But the other thing that I also did was I started reading a lot more in terms of fashion
Mm.
history and sustainable fashion. And I think that's also why you start to see sustainability be such a core pillar of the brand too.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I love what you said specifically about working in a field that energizes you. And that's what you found in VC. In what ways did you find that that energized you in as opposed to investment banking? And what are the main differences for those who might not know?
Yeah, I think for me, it's all subjective, but I think for me, a lot of what energized me was meeting so many different founders and management teams who have devoted so much time, energy, and oftentimes even their own capital into businesses. And then sitting on the other side of when you have such strong conviction in them, being able to join them on that journey and kind of make it to that next step or make it to exit, I thought was really empowering. It's also probably important to note that in undergrad, I was also an entrepreneurship major in addition to finance. So my love for entrepreneurs and the startup ecosystem is it has spanned a couple years, and I think that's also a contributor to why I liked being in the venture capital role because I got to see the startup ecosystem from another side. In college, it was we were trying to build a product, go to pitch competitions, put the business plan together. But now I'm sitting on the other side where I can help fund the businesses. Um, Banking, I think it was just a lot of hours. And at
Mm,
that time, I also think that I was young in a big city, pulled in so many different directions that I think sometimes I didn't know when to fully say, like, hey, I'm not going to go out and see friends tonight and it's going to be a self-care night or vice versa or like not have the self-care night but push myself to go out. Um you just working so many hours was really challenging and I think that it was really just the hours. I would say that I liked the job. I thought it was intellectually stimulating, but I knew as someone who is multifaceted to show up as my best self in every vertical that I choose to operate in, I guess you could say, I need to make sure that I carve out time for everything, even if it's just a small amount of time. Like I can't be all work. And I think that's what investment banking ended up feeling like. I think with the
mm-hmm.
hindsight, now having a lot more experience and maturing, I probably would have approached it differently. But I was young, I didn't know. And then having the additional time to just pursue other facets of life really, I think, was the marker for me that um, just like uplifted everything.
Yeah, I totally resonate with what you're saying because I remember when I first started out my career and I was doing sales, we worked so many hours. And when you're young, you don't really know how to establish those boundaries specifically in the workplace. And I know that a lot of people who work at Big Four are working at crazy hours of the night as well. And so it can be really difficult. So let's say that you are in a field, like if you were to give your advice to your past self about what it's like to sort of establish those boundaries, specifically when it comes to work, what's some advice that you would give? How would you approach that? Because I know that industry and finance, I wouldn't want to say rigid, but it's pretty traditional. I don't think there's been much change in it. So, how would you just approach that differently if you're talking to someone who's new in that space?
Yeah, this is such a good question. And there's a couple things. I identify as a morning person.
Mm-hmm.
So looking back, I would have pushed myself, even if I had stayed up late the night before, to just make it, even if it's just one time per week, that's not the weekend, to get to a workout class. Or if I have to push it till later in the day, because oftentimes they recognize that you're working late. So usually you can peel off in the evening or around dinner if you want to squeeze a workout in, to just take an hour for myself each day. I've really started to do that now, and I've seen the difference of just making sure that I'm checking in with myself. And I think in such a high pace environment where you're working a lot of hours, a simple act as just checking in with yourself is huge
Mm-hmm.
and doing something to care for your body. It doesn't have to be working out. It could be fueling your body with like an amazing, like healthy and nutritious meal. That was also something that's very different because we were ordering out a ton, which you could order healthy food. But when you did the group orders and you were working late, did you want to order the healthy food all the time? Most of the time,
No.
not. Right? Exactly. I also think that it's definitely easier said than done on this aspect
Mm-hmm.
of things, but you I don't know if this will resonate with you as well, but every email that I got felt so important. and that
Yes.
it needed to be answered right away. And there's some instances where that is very true and you need to be super responsive, but there's other times where you don't need to be that responsive, or you don't have to respond within like the first 5 minutes. And I think that's something and a boundary that I have really learned and set up.
Hmm.
But I think that's something daunting when you just start out and you like don't know what your team norm is, people's norm, because sometimes you have certain individuals on a team that prefer certain things than the way the rest of the team operates. So I think removing stress from email communications, which I know a lot of people struggle with, and then also just show up as my authentic self, to be honest. I think especially because I started so young in finance, like this whole term of finance bro like has been going on for years. And it's not just the bro. Like you have a finance aesthetic, especially here in New York and London and SF. And I always knew that I didn't fit that stereotype. Like I liked finance, I liked working in industry, but that's just like not the qualities that I identify
Hmm.
with. And I felt like for so long I was just trying to assimilate and fit in. And then it kind of clicked where I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to show up as me. And it really turned into my superpower of, okay, like I like to put work outfits together. Maybe I'll dress up just like randomly. I don't need a reason for a client meeting. I don't need a occasion to kind of dress up to and be authentically myself. I wasn't at that time huge into football or a lot of other sports that ends up getting talked about around the office, but I'll talk to you about culture. I'll talk to you about fashion shows. I'll talk to you about a whole other things. And then I would just take the initiative to just start those conversations myself so that I can participate and be active and be a part of the team in that sense. So I would say that those are some minor and major things that I would tell
Yeah.
myself if I could go back.
Yeah, you said a couple of things that I thought were really interesting. And the first thing that I want to point out is that I love that I could actively see you still living by your words because I Brianna does pop-ups for her brand. And one time I went to one of hers where she did a Pilates pop-up for influencers in the area. And it's just focusing on that wellness and the women empowerment as well. And it's also something that's authentic to you. And in such a women dominated space, like that brings forth a lot of empowerment. When you were in working in VC and investment banking, what was the ratio of men to women to your team? Because you're talking a lot about authenticity and football conversations. I know that I've been in spaces where I felt like the only, but I could only imagine it's incredibly skewed.
It is. And I think the industry is doing a lot to make it the representation of either gender or race or how you identify like more diverse. I
Hmm.
still think there's a lot of ways to go. When I was in investment banking, I was grateful that when I had started, the diversity was pretty good, especially for like the junior team. My analyst class on my team specifically, we I was there's 3 women out of the 4 analysts that started on that team, and then we had women associates and vice presidents. So it was really helpful to start
Hmm.
in that dynamic, because then we also would have like mentorship coffees, because there was a few of us who were considering continuing a path in investment banking post our analyst tenure. And I found that super helpful and informative. I also like to note that I was at a firm that I also felt like I had a voice and that
Hmm.
I could use my voice too, which I think was very helpful. So not only was I able to get to meet and try to find mentors from people directly on my team, I was able to network with a lot of people that were outside of my group that could kind of provide that support. When it came to BC, it was something similar as well. The dynamic wasn't 50-50. There's definitely less women and more concentrated on the junior side. It is something that I've noticed, and I think you can see that map also to the statistic where you see a lot of women founders not getting the same amount of capital attributed to them as their representation of being in the startup ecosystem and being a part of this population. I think that there's a lot more work to be done to make it more diverse and more equal, but it's not there yet, but we're doing a lot of work to get there.
Always progress.
Yeah,
One step at a time. It's progress.
exactly. Is it fair to say work and progress in this
Yeah.
moment? Which, for everyone listening, that is the brand's tagline.
Yeah. Work and progress for sure, for sure. I have one last question before we pivot into a little bit of your journey deeper into fashion. But for someone who's looking to get started in investment banking and also VC, can you list off advice that you have for them to sort of get started and break into the industry?
100%. When it comes to investment banking, that I thought the timelines were early when I was an undergrad in recruiting and they keep moving earlier. It is one of those things that if you think it possibly could be interesting, especially if you make that realization as a freshman, start going to the extracurricular clubs and to your career advisors because oftentimes a great way to get into the industry and to get some of those highly competitive internships is through their sophomore programming that they have. Whether it is a sophomore full summer internship or what they have are what they call like diversity days or insight days, where they'll fly you to the respective city and host you in their offices so you can learn about the opportunities available. But to make sure you can apply to those and participate in them, you have to start putting those pieces together as a freshman, which it can be very overwhelming and daunting because usually in freshman year, you are just trying to get a hold of being on your own for the first time, getting used to college life and what that academic schedule looks like, and then also balancing a social life on top of that. When it also comes to investment banking, there's so many third party resources that are available. A couple of the organizations that I was a part of was Sponsors for Educational Opportunity, which is short form for SEO. And they have so many different verticals, more so than investment banking, that a lot of people go through. And they provide coaching and they provide like the technical education so that you can succeed in the internships, in the interviews, and when you go full time. They even have organization, which is very similar, called MLT, Management Leaders for Tomorrow. But I think when they started, they did a lot more at like the MBA stage. But I know that they have programs for those in undergrad. When it comes to VC is really interesting. I am still trying to figure out like the best piece of advice because it looks so different based on the fund and based on the city and where you are. I've definitely started to see that working in VC out of undergrad is a lot more common. I'm starting to see a lot more analyst openings, fellowship programs for people just starting out earlier in their career. But typically, a lot of people pivot into it after either going through an investment banking program or some other private equity or going through consulting and even operations. A lot of people will get valuable experience building a startup and then use that to then be on the advisory and capital deployment side. So for the venture capital recruiting specifically, it's a little bit of a mix, but networking throughout the whole thing. If you can meet those people in the positions of what you want to do and you can build a relationship with them, that is huge because oftentimes with these competitive internships and job postings, it is going to come down to your relationships and who can kind of attest to your resume and your application to kind of push it along.
Yeah, it is always not always what you know, it's who you know. And that
Oh,
is such a
so
good
true.
nugget. Such a good nugget of advice. Like, and also, I love what you said a little bit earlier. Maybe 10 minutes ago, you said that you would go places solo and then
Mhm.
put yourself in positions where you'd be able to meet people, which is what helped accelerate your fashion career and like helped you just really be in the right spaces and get access to the right opportunities. Because also, I'm always looking, Brianna and I were friends on Instagram, obviously, but it's like I'm looking at her Instagram stories. She's everywhere. I love it because in New York, it's such a vibrant city and you there is so much to do. I was actually watching a podcast from Diary of a CEO, and the
Mhm.
guest was saying that if you're in your 20s, one of the best things you can do is live in one of the top super cities. And New York and San Francisco in the United States are super cities. Not saying that there aren't other great cities that you can live in, but New York and San Francisco is really great for here. And the fact that you're able to take advantage of so many opportunities, have so many connections, is just so inspirational after essentially building it from the ground up, right? Because you're from Toronto, you moved
Mhm.
out to New York City for work, and then you pivoted into a career in fashion and building good rapport. And speaking of, you mentioned a little bit earlier that you basically had all the pieces to building a business, but you just sort of put them together after all your experiences. So, what I mean by that is you mentioned that you were in your entrepreneurship club, and then obviously you had a career in finance and you're around these VC funds. So, how did that impact you and your decision when it came to actually building a fashion brand and you having this itch that you needed to scratch and this creative project you wanted to go full force with?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I would say that when it came to the brand, I had, and transparently speaking, before I had started working on it, I had probably started talking about it like outwardly to close friends and family for about 6 months prior to saying, like, okay, I'm actually going to start taking action towards this. Just kind of going back and forth on the idea and what made the most sense. And I think it was noticing that that thought pattern was not escaping me, like I kept coming back to it, was one of the things that I noticed where it was more than just a random idea and something that sounded good in the moment and that I didn't want to pursue maybe in the long term. But coming off of the experience that I had in undergrad, I kind of knew some of the foundational blocks that you needed to start to put in place to kind of get the business going. Whether that's you start to form legal entities, you start to put a business concept and business plan together, you start to think about all like the financial components, and you start to think about product development. I kind of had a frame of reference because I did spend my entire year incubating and then pitching a product in a team. And then it was really the end of 2021 where I was just like, you know what? I can't keep thinking about this anymore. I'm in such a great city to start something like this. I'm so passionate about it. And also, there was so much deeper meaning behind it than it just being clothes that I was just like, you know what? I will regret so much more if I don't start. I just need to do it. And if I fail, that's fine because at least I learned something along the way that I can put towards the future. And if I do have to step away or do something different, at least I don't have the regret. But then by starting to take those small actions and then getting them accomplished, it was like, oh yeah, I can actually do this. Or, oh, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was. I'm definitely someone who overthinks and can overthink often, which that can lead to a whole host of other things, whether that's anxiety or just getting trapped in my head. And just by doing the small actions and then getting those proof points and then just keep going and building up that momentum was huge.
Yeah, no, I love what you said because it really is just taking it one small step at a time, right? But you mentioned there was about a 6 month period when you were talking about it before you took that action. And I think that one thing a lot of people struggle with is that they're perpetually stuck in that period. And you did mention, like, okay, if I fail, that's okay, but at least I tried. But was there anything else that maybe you're afraid of happening that kept you stuck within those 6 months?
Yeah, I think there was a whole host of things. I think one of them was like the time commitment. Do I really have the time right now to dedicate to something like this? Do I want to make the sacrifices that can come along with it? Especially being in my 20s when everyone's being so social and traveling and doing all these things, I knew that if I was going to go fully into it, there was some things that I was going to omit myself from so that I could make this dream happen. So time was one of them, resources. I knew that I was still working a pretty demanding job at the end of the day. So then I had to go back and forth on like, what can I realistically take on my plate and what do I definitely need to outsource? Also, another tidbit about me is that I like things a certain way. I'm very particular and very type A. So like when I have this vision, I want to execute on it. And I know I don't have like a graphic design background. So that's somewhere I'm gonna have to get additional help and I can communicate my ideas and I can kind of put the vision together, but to then make that actual bridge into what you see now, I need additional help. So those were a lot of the things that I went back and forth on. And then I was just like, you know what, I just got to start. And then that's also kind of why you also see that we launched with only two SKUs as well. And then we sell other products from some of our partner brands. Because I learned this and it took a long road for me to get comfortable, but the start of anything is never going to be perfect.
Mhm.
And no matter how much you stay working on something, it will just never get there because your vision is so strong. And what you oftentimes need to reach the vision is iteration. You can't just hold it back. And you have to get the quality of whatever you're working on to a good point to get it out there to then really iterate on that. But it'll never be perfect. And you just got to get it out there and then keep going. And I think that's when that winter hit, when I was just like sitting at home on the holidays and I was just like, you know, I could be here for months more. I just got to start. And I know with reps and time, I'll just keep getting better and it'll come together. And as you were saying too, it's just like a lot of years pass by and it feels like it was yesterday. So focusing on the small is like really the best way to go. One, so you don't get overwhelmed, but then so you can be highly productive too, because the next thing you know, you're looking up and years have passed and you've come a long way.
Brianna, you're just dropping gem after gem after gem. I love what you said. I love what you said, especially because I did the artist way. It's a 12-week creative recovery course. And a lot of times, people who are multi passionate, highly ambitious, people who probably listen to this podcast and are like you and me, we tend to be perfectionists as well. So when it comes to that first draft of the product, it can almost never reach completion because we're so hell bent on it just being the most perfect thing ever. But I love what you said about just allowing it to be and having iteration so that it can get better and better. And even all the greats recommend that you can't just keep going with it, and after a certain period of time, a certain number of iterations, if you don't look back at your first product and think, whoa, this sucks, like you aren't sort of doing it right. So it's like your first draft is supposed to be really bad. I think that you also brought up another really great point about the sacrifices that you made, because like you're saying, in your 20s, I think that there's a stigma around going out and having a lot of fun, which you absolutely should, right? But it's like when it comes to chasing your dreams, it, there are high highs and there are low lows, and you are investing your money, your time, your relationships. It's a big trade-off. But one thing that I love that you said is it really highlights the point that you do what others won't now so you can get what others won't have later.
Yeah.
And so you're just putting in the work and you're putting in the reps.
I feel like you said that so well, and I'm going to take that for the future. I love the way that that was phrased, and it's so true. I also think the maturity aspect helped a lot too, in like
Mhm.
knowing who I am and like what makes me happy. Because I can tell you now so confidently, like I love to go out every once in a while, but I don't thoroughly like love it. I love being in my morning routine. I love being able to wake up early on a Saturday and get a workout class in and then get my errands done and then do something else, whether that's reading a book or whatever. And then like I just realized like going out's fun. You have the party, but then you're not feeling great the next day. Everything gets delayed. And it's through that self-discovery too, which takes so long. Like it's not an easy process. I feel like it's just I say it, but it took so long for me to realize those qualities and what I liked and what I didn't like. And then also, it took time to then fully embrace it and then stand up for myself in those scenarios because it's so easy to have the peer pressure, especially when you're post grad and young and in your 20s, to feel like you kind of just have to go with what everyone else is doing. You don't have to.
Yes.
And especially in New York City when there's so much going on, the fear of missing out can be extremely large. So
Yeah, no, I think that when you're in school and you're in these close communities, we want to conform and we want to be a part of the pack. We don't want to stray too far away from the pack. But when you get deeper into your 20s, that's the only path to fulfillment, really. And that's what you mentioned. And I find that whenever people find themselves back through that path, that's when all the magic happens. And one thing that I do want to point out that you said is that, or the essence of what you said is that you're basically standing in your full colors in every single way. And one thing that I notice about Bryanna is that she absolutely goes for her brand, right? So she is the loudest person in the room when it comes to her brand. And the reason why I point that out is because sometimes when it comes to building a brand, those limiting beliefs can be like, well, I don't want to talk about myself too much, or I don't want to feel like I'm bragging. And it should not be like that. You should be loud about yourself. And if you're not loud and shamelessly promoting yourself, no one is going to be. And it makes me want to talk a little bit about what you've been doing building in public as a founder. I think the way that you've been promoting yourself across platforms and especially on social media is admirable, and it's just so amazing to watch. And for a lot of people, posting on social media is scary, but you've
Oh,
embraced
yeah.
it with open arms.
It's terrifying
Yeah.
sometimes, just to put it simply.
And like, how did you? Okay, talk about the process when you started creating and posting on social media because you have a brand account on Instagram, you have your
Mhm.
personal account, you have your personal account on TikTok where you talk about being a founder.
Yeah.
So I would love to know your thought process and sort of the benefits that you've been able to reap from building in public as a founder because you've had some really cool things happen.
Thank you. It has come with time. I always like to be a little bit transparent and provide context, especially in these conversations, because I think context is huge. And especially when hearing about founder stories and journeys, like there are little pieces of their life or like things that happened in each chapter that are so relevant. Growing up, I always loved social media. I would do it and I would like pop up, then pop away, and then pop up. It was all private. It was just for friends and family. And then I was approaching when this brand was getting to launch, and my mindset is not many people know about me. I got to get this name out there. No one's going to market this like myself. And I was the person, especially in my finance career, that was more shy, more reserved, was not vocal. And I was just like, you know what? If I'm doing something for me, I got to show up for me and I got to be loud about it. I also saw that there was not that many people that looks like me at this age of Gen Z too that were sharing their stories of building companies. Also, because we're on the upper end of this demographic. So a lot of us are just entering this time period now. There's still a lot of our generation that are in college, in elementary school or high school. And I was just like, you know what? Someone might find this informative. Being on social media is native to me because I grew up with it all. Why not start documenting the story and just getting it out there and seeing what happens? I think social media is such an important tool, and you can craft kind of what you want and what you want to be out there and what you want to be known for by being on social media. And I had realized that through time and since being committing to being consistently public when the brand launched at the end of last year, these last couple of months, I've really been able to define what that looks like for me. And that's kind of when you're saying like you're on this platform and this platform. And this is also like where I refined, like, okay, like after testing a bunch of things and posting and trying a bunch of styles and seeing what I liked and what was like the most fun to create, I realized I like talking about three things: be, being in finance, being in fashion now, and then like the founder journey and like how that's all interconnected with the two other pillars. And then that's kind of where the slogan came from. I used to love writing in high school and then also post grad. So that I was just like, if I'm going to be documenting this online and kind of in short form content, I can just repurpose that as well and make it written content. And then that's kind of how I blossomed into so many platforms, is because I'm shooting it for one platform, which started as TikTok. I was just like, you know what? I might as well post it on Instagram. I might as well post it on YouTube Reels. If I love writing, I'll do it every once in a while. And then that's when I was like, you know, I need a central hub. That's when I created the website so that everything's linked and it's central and you can kind of understand everything. But content creation has been a journey. It's been up and down. It's definitely a little bit of the Wild West. You have to set up boundaries for yourself so that you can have fun while doing it. It's so interesting. And this is probably an anecdote, which I will not take you on a rabbit hole, I
No, it's okay.
promise. But it's so interesting to see. And I always say that I'm chronically online and I joke about this and I'll joke about it at work too, is because you can learn a lot about culture being chronically online, and culture ends up informing so many important business decisions. And if you can have and build up the skill to see what's happening on social media before it kind of comes into like the physical world fully, or that connection is made, that can be a game changer. And that's why I love being online. But it's so interesting because you see a lot of young people and people online showing up and feeling like they have to share everything. And that's just not the case. You can have a great presence online and you do not need to share every facet and detail of your life. And then that's kind of what I realized that I needed to do to keep this fun of like a lot of my content's going to revolve around those three pillars. And maybe once in a while you'll get something that doesn't fall outside of it. But like a lot of my personal relationships, whether that is family, friends, romantic, just like will not make it online. And I think figuring out your boundaries again is so important to this all, especially when you become a founder, especially if you decide to do it publicly too.
Yeah, definitely. Reminds me of when people say, or I guess the essence of, you can show up and be online and you'll be public, but your life is still private.
Mhm.
And I think that oversharing does bite some people in the long run. But back to what you're saying about it shaping culture and being online, I 100% agree. Like even the presidential election that's going on right now, online social media culture
Yep,
is a huge influence, a huge influence. And
exactly.
I've seen some people compare founders not being online and not building a personal brand to businesses refusing to be on Instagram in 2018. And look at how that happened. Look at how that worked out.
It's so interesting. I was having a conversation with another founder at the end of last week on this exact thing. Uh,
Oh,
when is it when is it preferred for the founder to be the face of the brand and take a public presence? And when is it ideal for them to be hidden and kind of take a back seat? It's a fascinating conversation. We didn't get any clear answers. I think it all comes down to like personal preference, the product, and the story that you're telling behind the product. But it is quite fascinating to see because you have some great people that are doing it, like Little Sweet Treat in the candy store that just opened here in New York City. Like she's done an amazing job of showing what it's like to build her store online and taking people through the ins and outs of it. And now she has tens of thousands of followers, a dedicated customer base. She's even now moving into creator status, getting so many like PR gifting as well.
yes.
So I think there's so much upside to being putting yourself out there and being online. There is like the dark side of the internet as well, but I think there's so many benefits, especially if you're a founder, to just put yourself out there.
Yeah. It's funny. I think I saw a meme somewhere. It's like, I'm a founder, so of course I'm a content creator. Like,
Oh yeah. You have to.
yeah.
It's just one of those requirements now. Everything's gone digital.
Everything's gone digital. So, we're going to be wrapping up in a couple of moments, but I had a couple final questions for you. I feel like our whole conversation today was just so enlightening and it's just always a breath of fresh air speaking to you. But you've posted a lot of content online called
Mhm.
Advice to My Younger Self. So, I would love if you could just give a couple pieces of advice for our audience about, building good rapport, and then also some things related to entrepreneurship and paving your own way that they can walk away with.
Yeah. I would say that this is just a general life principle, and I already alluded to it before, but I want to reiterate it because especially with us being so interconnected as we are now, this is only being emphasized more. But if you are someone who identifies as being multifaceted or having several different passions, or feeling like you have to split time between a lot of things and that you don't easily fit inside of a label or a box, like that is okay. Lean into that. Lean into it so much because I truly think it can be a superpower. And we're also getting into a time period where people have so many different skills that you might not associate as skills that would work together, whether it's having this finance career or being in fashion. And especially to the young woman, I think oftentimes people want to fit us in that box or into something that's easily defined, but that does not have to be the case. And I think through that, you'll understand what your unique voice is and how best to use it. Um, don't be afraid to use your voice and to fight for what's important to you and what's right, because even if you decide not to use it, it's only going to come up again in the future until you really do, until you embrace it, until you own it, until you speak it. When it comes to building a company and a brand and being on the entrepreneur side, um, it takes so much resiliency. You're going to be tested through the high moments and through the low moments. And I definitely remember getting this advice before I had started, but it gets reinforced and I realize how important it is. But it is going to be a winding journey. You are going to go through it all of the emotions, but it is also so fulfilling on the other side, especially if you're someone who can deal with a lot of autonomy. If not, maybe figure out if you need a co-founder because that can be huge and help you out a ton. And then when it comes to finance, it's start early. Networking, relationships are huge in this industry, especially with it getting so competitive and them going outside of kind of like the traditional group of schools that they used to look at. Um, they're going outside of that cohort. Your relationships matter. Your relationships matter through everything, even when you're founding a business. And I think the last piece of advice that I'll give tied to that too is that don't be afraid to share your story. Don't be afraid to tell people what you're doing because oftentimes people want to help and they just don't know how best to help you. And you'd be surprised at how many conversations I said, I'm building this workwear brand and here are our core pillars. And someone that I had just met is like, I love it. Thank you for telling me I have someone that you should know or you should be introduced to. It happens so often. So don't be afraid to say that. You don't need to be at the end goal. You can be in process and be confident and talk about it, and you'll be surprised how many people want to help.
Oh my gosh, heavy on all of this. I feel like I need to like go back and just incorporate all of this in my early 20s for myself. But I loved it. Thank you so much.
I'm
I've
so
learned,
calm.
yeah, no, I had so much fun speaking with you today. And I know that everybody who's listening to this, you dropped so many gems. Like they are going to walk away with a ton of information. But this doesn't have to be the last time that they see you or know of you. So
Exactly.
can you please let them know where they can keep in contact with you?
Yes, definitely check out the brand. It is goodrapport.nyc. You can also check out the content that I share on bryannasamuels.com. It has a link to my Substack and then also other social media pages.
Great. Sounds good. And I will link all of that in the show notes. And so you guys can definitely stay up to date with everything Bryanna is doing. And that is it for today. So thank you once again, Bryanna, for joining us on Make Up Your Mind. And everybody else, we will see you next week. Bye.